The Montana Territory in 1887 was a place where every promise carried a hidden price tag. On paper, the offer was simple: 160 acres, free to anyone willing to prove up a claim. In reality, it felt less like a gift and more like a contract written in weather. The land did not care what you were owed. It only asked what you could endure. Summer could scorch the prairie until it cracked like old pottery, but winter was the real judge. It came down hard and clean, dropping temperatures to 40 below with a calm that made it feel personal. At that depth of cold, everything becomes honest. Wood tightens and complains in its joints. Iron turns treacherous. Breath no longer feels like air. It feels like something you borrow from the world for a moment and then surrender in a plume of frost. Out here, civilization meant a log cabin, straight timber, stacked into a shape that resembled safety gaps, packed with mud straw and manure, a tight door, a stove, a chimney. The cabin was supposed to be proof that you belonged, that you had arrived, that you had won a foothold against the wild. But for a widow named Emma Harrion, the log cabin was not victory. It was a slow-moving emergency. Since the fever took her husband in '85, Emma had learned that cold is not a single event, it is a nightly campaign. She had spent too many hours watching the inside of her walls turn white, the ice forming like a second skin over the logs. She'd stood over the stove until her eyes burned, feeding it wood with the desperate logic of someone trying to outpace a thief. Yet the wind outside was stronger than her effort. It pulled heat from the cabin the way a strong river pulls soil from a bank patient, relentless, unconcerned with how hard you shove back. Her daughters slept in layers that would have seemed excessive anywhere else. Quilts, coats, scarves wrapped around small throats. Even then their shivering did not stop. It only changed rhythm like an engine that cannot settle. Emma would lie awake listening for the smallest signs of danger. A cough that turned wet, a child's breathing that sounded thin, the kind of quiet that comes when the body starts losing the argument. She began to understand the lie at the heart of the log cabin. A cabin tries to fight winter head-on, like a man pushing against a blizzard with bare hands. It depends on constant fuel, constant attention, constant luck. And if your woodpile runs low, or your chimney backdrafts, or the wind finds one weakness in the seams, the whole idea of civilization collapses in a single night. Then, on a February morning, Emma noticed something that made her stop mid-step. In the barn, the air was different. Not warm in a comfortable sense, but gentler, steadier, less cruel. The animals stood in their own heat, breathing slow and heavy, turning feed into warmth without ceremony. The difference was immediate: 10, maybe 15 degrees, enough to make her shoulders loosen without her noticing. Enough to make her think a thought that felt dangerous. The animals were warmer than her children. Emma didn't romanticize it. She didn't turn it into a sermon. She simply let the truth land where it belonged. If the barn could hold warmth better than the cabin, then the cabin wasn't the standard of progress she'd been told it was. It was just tradition. And tradition out here could kill you as efficiently as cold itself. Standing there, surrounded by the steady life of livestock and the muted shelter of rough boards, Emma Harrion made a decision that would change everything. She would stop trying to build higher, tighter, prouder. She would stop trying to conquer the air. She would go to the one place winter could not easily reach. She would stop building up and start digging down. By mid-March, when the Montana ground finally loosened its grip, Emma began her experiment the way practical people always do, quietly, without speeches, without witnesses, without permission. There was no committee to convince, no neighbor to impress. There was only the calendar, the memory of 40 below nights, and the knowledge that next winter would not negotiate. She started at the edge of the barn where the soil was hardest, the clay packed dense as if the land itself resented being moved. Every shovel bite rang with resistance. The earth came up in heavy slabs that refused to crumble, and the work punished the wrists and shoulders the way all honest labor does. Emma hauled it out a bucket at a time, setting the dirt aside in a growing ridge that looked to anyone passing like a widow digging her own trouble. But Emma did not stop at a shallow root cellar, the kind most families used for potatoes in jars. She went down 4 feet, 6, 8, until the shovel met bedrock with a dull, final sound. And at that depth, the world changed. The air down there did not behave like the air above. It held its temperature with an almost stubborn steadiness, sitting in the mid-40s to mid-50s no matter what madness the sky decided to bring. Emma felt it immediately, not as warmth exactly, but as absence of cruelty, a place where the cold did not have sharp teeth. She wasn't digging a room just to escape discomfort. She was severing her family's dependence on a fragile idea that a thin-walled cabin could outburn the wind forever. Down here, the earth itself did the work a stove could never fully accomplish. It buffered, it stored, it refused extremes. Emma lined the walls with hand-split limestone hauled from the creek. She chose stone because she understood something. Most people only learn after losing a winter wood is quick to warm and quick to surrender that warmth, but stone is slow, and in winter, slow is strength. Stone absorbs heat like a memory and gives it back on its own schedule. Every rock she set into place was a promise that tonight would not collapse into ice if the fire faltered. For the ceiling, she scavenged 8-inch timber beams from an abandoned claim, straight enough, sound enough, then notched them into the bedrock as if she were anchoring the room to the bones of the earth. She sealed gaps with the same hard logic she used everywhere. If wind can enter, it will. If meltwater can find a path, it will. Her hands learned the shape of every weakness and closed each one. But the true genius of her design was not the depth or the stone or even the tightness of the build. It was what she placed directly above it, her livestock. Emma had noticed what others ignored. Animals are not just possessions or labor. They are heat, constant metabolic, produced hour after hour without complaint. A mature cow throws off warmth like a slow furnace. A mule adds its own steady output. Chickens clustered together at night become a small living radiator. In every barn across the territory, that heat rose into rafters and vanished into the night air, wasted. Emma decided it would not be wasted anymore. She positioned the sleeping space beneath the stalls, not in filth, but in advantage, engineering her life around the oldest principle on the plains: use what you have and lose nothing you can keep. The warmth above would rise, press down through the structure, and settle into the stone below, where it could be held instead of stolen. The neighbors, when they noticed, made sport of it. They called her a badger, said it was undignified to sleep beneath animals, said grief had made her strange. Samuel Greer, a carpenter with confident hands and louder opinions, warned her she would suffocate or that the load would crush her in the night. Emma did not argue. Arguing is for people with spare energy. She just kept to her routine. Morning chores in the thin light, evening descent into the earth, and a steady earned warmth that cost her only a fraction of the wood she used to burn enough to maintain comfort rather than fight for survival. Strange or not, she could feel the difference in her daughter's hands when she held them, less icy, less desperate, and that was all the proof she needed. January 12th, 1888, arrived wearing a mask. The morning carried the softness people prayed for in midwinter, a January thaw that made the world feel temporarily forgiven. The sun had a pale warmth to it. Snow on the barn roof sagged and dripped. Children walked to school with their coats unbuttoned cheeks, pink more from play than pain. Men left gloves on porch rails thinking they would not need them. Even the cattle seemed less restless, as if the air itself had relaxed. That is how the Great Plains killed people, not only with brute force but with misdirection. By midday, the sky began to change in a way most eyes missed at first. The light flattened. The horizon blurred as if the land had been smudged with a dirty thumb. A wind rose, not dramatic, not cinematic, but efficient. It slid into seams, tested latches, searched for weakness, the way water searches for low ground. Then the white hurricane came down. An Arctic front collided with warm air that had drifted up from the Gulf, and the shift was violent enough to feel like a betrayal. Temperature fell fast above freezing to well below zero in hours, then kept falling. The wind strengthened into something that did not merely push. It scoured. Snow stopped behaving like snow and became airborne grit, moving sideways in sheets, so thick you could lose your own fence line from 10 steps away. The world turned featureless, no path, no landmark, no over there, just white motion and the sound of your own breathing turning panicked inside your scarf. Across the valley, families in proper cabins began to fail in predictable ways. Chimneys backdrafted under the force of the wind, pushing smoke into rooms instead of pulling it out. Stoves demanded more wood than any careful pile could supply. People burned what they could reach: chairs, table legs, broken crates, anything that would turn into heat for an hour. And still the rooms hovered in the 30s, damp with breath filled with the kind of cold that makes fingers clumsy and decisions worse. But beneath the Harrion barn, the storm was reduced to a rumor. 8 feet of earth did what no wall of logs ever could. It ignored the atmosphere. The wind could not strip heat from stone wrapped in soil. The temperature down there barely flinched. In fact, the very violence above helped her snowdrifts packed against the barn ceiling cracks, layering insulation, smothering drafts that would have otherwise stolen warmth. Emma's daughters sat at the rough table and worked their lessons as if the world had not turned murderous. The room held steady in the high 50s, luxurious, not because it was hot, but because it was stable. And stability in a blizzard is mercy. Emma listened for Sarah's cough, the wet, rattling sound that had haunted the last winter like a warning. This time, it came softer, less frequent, the kind of change a mother feels before she dares to believe it. Emma had not beaten winter in a contest of strength. She had simply refused to play by winter's rules. She had outsmarted it. When the storm finally broke on January 14th, it did not leave a clean ending behind. It left inventory. Fences disappeared under sculpted drifts. Doors were sealed shut from the outside as if winter had decided certain homes did not deserve to reopen. In the valley, smoke hung low and thin because so many stoves had been run hard and still failed to keep pace. Inside the cabins, the damage was not always visible at first glance. It showed up in cracked lips, swollen knuckles, blood-dark blisters on fingers that had tried to fix frozen latches. It showed up in animals found stiff in stalls where there had been no wind, only insufficient shelter and exhausted owners. Woodpiles were gone, not stolen, consumed. Families who had cut and stacked with pride in October now stood in January staring at bare ground where their winter should have been. Many had burned 3 weeks of fuel in 3 days and still slept in rooms that never rose past the high 30s. Survival had become a crude equation: burn more, suffer less, and hope the pile outlasts the cold. That was why Joseph Kern noticed Emma's yard. Her woodpile still stood with the same squared edges it had the week before. The sight did not just confuse him. It offended his sense of how winter worked. He had always believed the cold demanded payment in labor and fuel. If Emma had stayed warm, she should have paid more than anyone because she was alone. He knocked, he stepped in, and he followed her down. The moment he entered the underground room, his face changed in a way Emma recognized instantly, the look of a man discovering that his certainty has been expensive. The air carried a steady warmth that did not feel like a fire's momentary generosity. It felt structural. 14 hours after her stove had gone out, the room still held near 60 degrees, the stone giving back what it had stored, the earth refusing to surrender it. Joseph's pride did not break loudly, it simply went quiet. "I owe you an apology," he said at last. Emma looked at him the way she looked at most things out here, without drama, without need to win. "You don't owe me anything," she replied. "I was just cold, and this made us less cold. That's all it ever was." But the valley heard the lesson anyway. By the next winter, people stopped calling it undignified and started calling it smart. Barn quarters entered the local vocabulary the way practical terms always do, passed from mouth to mouth in half-embarrassed conversations, traded like a tool you didn't know you needed until you saw it work. Men who had mocked her now dug into hillsides. Families copied her drainage floors, her limestone walls, her tight seams, her understanding of heat, as something you capture, not something you chase. Even Samuel Greer, the carpenter who predicted her failure, came around in the only way a proud man can, by borrowing the design and calling it sound building practice when he used it for a boarding house in Helena. Emma didn't ask for credit. She had never been building a legend. She had been building a way through winter. Emma Harrion passed in 1904, but not the way the territory expected a woman like her to pass. Not frozen in a half-finished cabin, not worn down by pneumonia and bad luck. She died having watched her daughters grow into healthy, capable women. Proof that endurance is not only measured in what you survive, but in what you prevent from happening to the ones who depend on you. That is the part people often miss when they tell frontier stories. They speak of grit as if it is a badge, as if suffering is the required price of belonging. But Emma's life argued for a different kind of strength. The quiet competence that does not seek permission, does not beg to be understood, and does not waste time performing dignity when the weather is taking attendance. Her underground room still exists, tucked beneath what is now a modern barn, as unassuming as the mind that designed it. The boards above have been replaced. New roofing, new nails, different hands running the place. But below the surface, the earth continues doing what it has always done. The temperature holds steady around 50 degrees, indifferent to fashion, indifferent to pride, indifferent to whatever the sky decides to throw at the valley. It remains there like a lesson you can stand inside. Because Emma's answer was never better technology, it was better thinking. She refused to treat winter as an opponent that could be outmuscled. She treated it as a system with rules, and she stepped outside those rules. She chose the stability beneath her feet over the chaos above her head. She used thermal mass instead of constant combustion. She captured waste heat instead of buying more fuel. She accepted strange as a small price for safe. And that is why her story carries forward long after her name has faded from most maps. It offers a corrective to the modern instinct to chase novelty, to believe the newest product or loudest expert will save us. Sometimes the oldest truths remain the most reliable. The earth is steady, and the air is not. Stone remembers warmth. Soil insulates. Life itself produces heat, and heat can be guided like water if you respect how it moves. As we face the winters of our own lives, literal or otherwise, there is something useful in Emma's example. Not the romance of hardship, but the discipline of refusing unnecessary hardship. The courage to be the only one doing it differently. The willingness to let people call you names while you keep your children alive. Being warm beats being correct every single time. Stay prepared. Keep your roots deep.